Viewers who are not interested in my back and forth debates over whether or not the Apollo missions were real are more than welcome to skip this video. It seems that Greater Sapien has responded to my response to him. And as usual, the regulars have fallen blindly behind any pro-NASA video they can find, no matter how pitiful it is. Here is my response. He starts by poisoning the well, characterizing my response as, quote, a conspiracy theorist's attempt at saving face.
Serious?
Some of you may know that Jarrah White has made a video response to my Radioactive Fallacy video, claiming that I misinterpreted his sources and he felt the need to clarify. I'm not interested in getting into a back and forth with White and being added to his list of opponents. I'm not even interested in moon landing discussions, to tell the truth.
If you are not interested in back and forth discussions, then you should not have got involved in the first place.
But with this video, he's doubled down on some of his errors, and so I'm compelled to say something. Hopefully this won't take too long. I'll start with the smaller points, so this is not going to go along the video chronologically. He concedes that it's possible to get satellites through the Van Allen belts, but says they need to be shielded and turned off, and it's not possible to shield a person enough, and they can't be turned off. That it's not possible to shield enough just isn't the case. Remember, we don't have to block all radiation, just bring the exposure down to safe levels.
Yeah. I never said you had to stop all the radiation, just bring it down to safe levels. What gave you the idea that I implied otherwise? I know you only saw the first part of my video. Had you watched my subsequent videos, you would have seen me discuss the requirements involved in bringing the radiation down to safe levels. For example, I showed that a ship with 2 meters of water shielding would reduce the doses in the belts to only 0.042 rem per hour, and using the shieldings the Apollos used, because they were not even rated at the minimal amount of shielding required to stop even the lower end of the proton and electron energy range, the astronauts would have absorbed hundreds to thousands of rem depending on their trajectory. In this case, over 600 rem per hour.
And the fact is, finely tuned instruments like satellites are actually more sensitive to radiation damage than people are. We're pretty tough. Not to belittle radiation exposure at all, but a certain doses of radiation we can shake off, but a little damage to an electronic device can render it useless quickly.
Irrelevant. As stated in the New Science article, the radiation imperils both satellites and humans. Being more resistant to radiation than a satellite isn't going to do anyone any good if the radiation is at unsafe levels for both.
In defending himself from my accusation that he was perhaps wrongfully conflating REM and Roentgen in a quote from Van Allen, he references a Wikipedia article on Roentgen, highlighting a section and saying,
Firstly, for human flesh, 1 rem is indeed equivalent to 1 Röntgen.
Not caring that the pullout references Roentgen, rads, and Gray, not REM, and is also speaking specifically about gamma radiation, not particle radiation.
This is just getting pathetic. Anyone who has taken as minimal effort to, for example, go onto Google and typing 1 rad in REM or 0.01 Gray in REM knows that both are equal to 1 rem. And why would you expect an article on Röntgens to say anything on doses from particle radiation? Röntgens, by definition, refer to the amount of radiation absorbed only from either X-ray or gamma-ray photons. RADS, Grays, and REM covers the doses from both photons and particles, although REM specifically covers the radiation in human flesh. Van Allen stated that the doses were equivalent to 10 to 100 Röntgens, which are therefore equivalent to 10 to 100 RADs, which in humans is the same as 10 to 100 rems. Now, if you have evidence that 1 Röntgen of X-ray exposure gives a different number of rads than 1 Röntgen of gamma-ray exposure, then just state as such. Show us your numbers. In any case, this whole argument is pointless, because as I pointed out, even electrons in the low energy range would produce levels of secondary radiation far in excess of what any of the astronauts received. Unless you can tell us why this isn't the case, there's little point in continuing.
He says in my video that I agree with most of his facts but misinterpreted the sources. This isn't true. What I'm actually saying is that even if we take some of his statements as facts, he's making a flawed interpretation of those facts and making flawed assumptions because of it.
Thank you for your clarifier. I'll let the viewers judge which of us is making flawed interpretations of the facts.
For example, let's all recognize that he bypassed my main point, which was that he took the range that Van Allen proposed as a maximum radiation level and stated as a fact that the maximum of that maximum is what happened, completely ignoring the fact that the exposure was more likely somewhere in here. Then he adds to his false assumptions by saying,
Secondly, considering that all the Apollo astronauts returned with generally less than 2 rems of radiation, I'd say this conflicts with Dr. James's ranges.
No, it doesn't. You see, Van Allen said the maximum would be from 10 to 100. Maximum. 0 to 10 still exists. Apparently, the maximum was not attained.
Okay, now I think I get your point. As to why I focused on the higher end of the range, could it be because I was comparing the Van Allen belt with NOAA 720, a solar flare that contained particles of the same energy as the highest energy particles, and exposure to which would have resulted in symptoms that occur at 100 rads, which is equal to the higher end of the range Van Allen gave in Röntgens? I like to compare apples with apples. Anyways, I still considered the lower end of the range in subsequent videos. If you are not going to sit through all my videos, the least you could do is post a comment and say, "Hey, why didn't you consider this?" And I would be happy to post a reply linking to a video where I address your concern.
In my original video, I criticized him for making the false statement that the astronauts had encountered this flood of near-lethal light-speed particles. His defense is, since the Apollo missions were during a similar solar maximum, he can say it was under the special circumstances too. Here he shows that he still does not understand where the flaw in his thinking is, so I guess I have to spell it out better. He is allowed to say that the Apollo missions were under similar circumstances as the 2000 solar maximum. What he is not allowed to say is that since these circumstances occurred, the particles were accelerated to lethal levels. He can say they may have been at lethal levels. He can say it's possible they were at lethal levels, but he can't say they were. Because the scientific position is, under certain circumstances, particles can be accelerated. There is potential. Not under certain circumstances, they are. What he is doing is taking every place where something can or may happen and saying it will and did, and taking the potential maximum and calling it the actual factual. And also, when you're dealing with these type of probabilities, there is a possibility that some particles will be accelerated and some won't, in different locations, at different concentrations. But he made the statement, and still is making the statement, that since it was possible for it to happen, it did happen, and it happened on the mission's path, which he cannot say, and that is where his thinking is flawed. Did you notice that he continues to quote the articles in the late 90s expressing concern that the solar maximum in late 2000 would cause this tremendous surge of dangerous particles in the Van Allen belts, and that it was a greater potential for solar flare activity? This is 2012. Why is he still talking about the potential Van Allen activity and solar flares during the 2000 and early 70s solar max, instead of what actually happened? Was there major solar flare activity during the Apollo missions? Did the Van Allen belt show activity in 2000 that can be directly correlated with the Van Allen conditions during the missions? I'm sure if he had that data, he would show it.
And I'm sure had you watched my subsequent videos, you would have seen me show the said data. In later videos, I showed that a total of 30 major solar flares had occurred over the Apollo missions. The records also show that major solar flares had been occurring in the days or weeks leading up to some of those missions, which would no doubt have accelerated those particles. And the reason I discussed the 1998 article is because that is when these special circumstances were discovered to exist. As some have posted on Greater Sapiens video, just because these circumstances were unknown back during the Apollo missions, that didn't mean these circumstances didn't exist. If you can't be bothered to watch my videos from start to finish, then you shouldn't be reviewing them. The remainder of Greater Sapiens video is casting aspersions on my intentions, branding us as members of a cult, blinded by our alleged egos. This is pointless and has no bearing on the subject of radiation. But there is one last thing that I would like to comment on.
My goal here is not to prove the moon landings happened. That's long since been proven. It's been proven by the fact that every legitimate question has been answered several times. Real inquiries, not, why didn't the astronauts look happy? That's not a legitimate question. The real questions have been answered.
Answered? Answered by who? Proven liars like Phil Plait and Jay Windley, who have been proven wrong countless times? Or complete jackasses who go on international television and present their own bunglings as proof for the moon landing, but when pressed at a conference in front of their adoring fans, admit that what they do is, quote, entertainment, not science? The goal of my videos is to establish whether or not these questions have indeed been answered. Anyone who follows my videos knows that if a question has indeed been answered, I acknowledge it. If I make a mistake, I correct it. If someone has tried to pass off their pseudoscience as proof for the moon landings, I will shoot it down. Since you are not interested in the Apollo missions, and are more interested in exposing bad thinking, I strongly suggest you look elsewhere. You will not find it in my videos.